My name is Yuri Suarez. I'm Chief Impact Officer at IDB Lab, and I'm thrilled to have today representatives of two of the most exciting ecosystems globally, which are Korea and Israel. And we're going to be having a conversation with both of them about the relationship between their ecosystems in Latin America. So let's jump right into it. Let me introduce our speakers. Wendy Singer is Executive Director of Startup Nations Central. SNC is Israel's leading NGO developing the startup and innovation ecosystem. Wendy is now heading the Jerusalem operation of SNC, and SNC has been a trusted partner of IDB Lab for many years. Welcome, Wendy. And Seokjin Chan is Director of International Cooperation at Born to Global Center, the Korean government's global startup incubation and acceleration agency under the Ministry of Science and ICT. Seokjin has also worked in the Korean government in other roles in Ministry of Planning, Budget, Economy, Finance, and the Presidential Council on National Competitiveness. Welcome, Seokjin, this morning also. So let's jump right into it. And I'm going to actually start with Seokjin, and then we'll go to Wendy. Seokjin, the first question to you is, tell us what's unique about the Korean innovation ecosystem. Seokjin.
Thank you very much, Yuri, and we are honored, privileged to have this opportunity to talk to you about the Korean ecosystem, but also our ideas to share and partner with our Latin American colleagues and startups here today. So thank you very much for the introduction. Now, regarding your question, I think Korea has been enjoying a top position according to the Bloomberg Innovation Index for the past few years. And I think the key three elements that have contributed to this success have been obviously R&D intensity, manufacturing value added, and patent activity. And patent activity, we've been recording the top place in the world for a few years. And I think that really goes to show how active people are in taking their ideas and turning into a business. Now, regarding the key elements that have made this possible, I would have to turn to the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor that many of you to refer to. And three elements really point Korea out, and they are obviously government support. As you know, we have grown from the Korean War in the 1950s to a global, advanced nation in terms of technology and science, and that's really due to the government support, and that also applies to the startup ecosystem. Another key area I would have to say is the infrastructure. As many of you may know, we have 15 million people in a very, very crowded country. Also with a very, very intense ICT infrastructure and of course 5G, which makes it a very interesting test bed for startups to try out their technologies and their ideas. And obviously the ease of market entry and deregulation is another key element. So what we've seen in Korea for the past few years is an amazing increase in the ecosystem itself in terms of size and volume. We have seen over 5% increase in government support programs to reach over 1.3 billion US dollars this year. We have also seen, I'm sure also in other countries, and I know that this is also happening in Latin America, is the increasing volume in venture capital investments. We have seen about 240% increase in the past 9 years in startup investments. So that's a very, very positive sign. And last but not least, the key areas that have received and enjoyed this investment have been ICT, bio, and services and logistics. So those key elements and those key policies have, I think, contributed to the growth of the ecosystem. I think, and now we are ready to partner with our Latin American startups and ecosystem players to take it onto a global level. So thank you, Sir. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you, Seokjin. So, infrastructure, government policy investment by government in the innovation ecosystem, along with that remarkable growth that Korea's had over the last several decades. It's really remarkable. So Wendy, the Israel experience is a little bit different, but no less exciting. Tell us what's special about the Israeli ecosystem. You're on mute, Wendy.
Okay, try that again. Great to be with you. I think the thing to keep in mind for those that are less familiar with the Israeli ecosystem is that when the state of Israel was born over 70 years ago, we were a tiny country with little or no natural resources in a not really welcoming neighborhood. And then you fast forward to 70 plus years later, and you're looking at a country that has over 6,000 startups. Now that's one startup for every 1,400 people. And if you just run through kind of the classic rankings in terms of what would make the differentiation for the tech story here, you're talking about 12.5% of the GDP. So even though there's only 9% of the workforce that's employed by the tech sector, I always call it a very noisy part of the economy. Because as I said, it's 12.5% of GDP and about 52% of our exports. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, just when Sochin was talking about the increase in the VC investment in Korea, in the last few years, and even when we thought this had to have some kind of dent because of COVID, the VC investment in Israeli startups has been greater per capita than any other country in the world. So last year we had just over $10 billion during 2020. And now we're in October of 2021 and we're already 40% beyond that, with also a huge surge in the number of unicorns. Also in terms of investment in R&D, what's great about sharing this platform with Sochin is that Israel and Korea keep flipping places for #1 on the OECD index of the investment in R&D. So I think Korea's actually #1 at the moment, but we do keep flipping in each OECD ranking, and that's strictly in civilian R&D. Now, what I also just want to point out, sort of from a broader kind of a zoom out perspective, is that I think something that sets apart the Israeli tech ecosystem is just the prevalence of what we would call deep tech. And that is something that is largely coming out of the Israeli military. You may know that the military service here is actually mandatory. And what happens is people that are in the military, even if they're not in one of the elite tech units like 8200 or 8100 or Telpio, those are sort of the iconic ones. If you're not creating technology, you're being exposed to technology. So what happens is that people who are coming out of the military are really poised to start some of the most cutting edge startups. And if it's not, they're coming out with this deep tech horizontal skill set. They're coming out with a whole range of soft skills, which are also quite relevant, in the startup world.
No, it's remarkable, and of course, kind of the procurement aspect of militaries across the globe have had a relationship with innovation for sure in other countries. Position #1, position #2. Yesterday, we saw Ignacio Peña talking about how far Latin America is from Israel, how far it is from Korea, but that there are really hopeful signs, year-over-year growth in investment in innovation, early stage in particular. As you were saying, Wendy, also in Latin America has just boomed, barely skipped a beat on COVID. Actually, I think we actually posted a better result than 2019, and this year, of course, we've already surpassed that. So I guess the second question is related to that connection between your ecosystems in Latin America. And Sochin, maybe going to you, can you talk a little bit about Born to Global and how you're helping to connect the Korean innovation ecosystem with Latin American companies and Latin American actors?
Thank you, Yuri. For the Born to Global Center, we enjoy a very interesting mandate, which is global collaboration of Korean startups and global startups. We think that we are privileged to have such an institution. And I think it's also proof that there are so many startups and entrepreneurs who want to connect with the global ecosystem rather than to succeed simply domestically in the Korean market. Traditionally, of course, Korea has been a collaborator with global startups as a hub for creating their MVPs and their POCs due to its manufacturing platform and its industries. However, I think COVID-19 has brought a very, very interesting perspective. And many of the startups started to come to me and they said, before, China was a much closer place to Korea than Latin America and the Caribbean. Now it's all the same, except for the Zoom's time difference. There was no differentiator. And that really kind of kicked us off in the direction of starting and actually concentrating more on linking our startups with Latin American startups. Luckily, we have been also partnering with, of course, the great people at IDB Lab to launch a pilot project to see whether we can connect global, as Wendy correctly mentioned, deep tech startups with Latin American startups and see if there can be some tech transfers, synergy created between the startups, and also hopefully joint ventures or partnerships, either born in Latin America and the Caribbean for their growth locally in the region, or partnerships formed here in Korea or in Asia or other parts of the world for the Latin American and the Caribbean startups to expand to the global market. And we have, of course, during the past year, despite COVID, have been able to create 5 potential partnerships or working partnerships between startups of the world and Latin America and the Caribbean startups. And I was really impressed to see that it was initially we had thought that it would be mostly a one-sided tech transfer type project, whereas the reality, as you will see today later on by our great startup CEOs and entrepreneurs, that it was not a one-sided project, but rather a true partnership and joint venture between startups. So I think COVID-19 has brought actually eliminated the distance element in partnerships and rather brought the startups closer together. I think I hope that will continue on even in the post-COVID era, Yuri.
Thank you so much, Sochin. Just a comment that you mentioned deep tech, that at least in Latin America, sometimes the expertise required in fund managers and private innovation outfits in those very vanguard topics takes some time to build. It doesn't materialize instantly, and kind of it's a role also that we see at IDB Lab of being present in maybe some verticals or some tech that the industry is not occupied yet. So Wendy, how about SNC? What's your strategy? How are you linking with Latin America? I know we've had a lot of collaborations, but where are you coming from? What's your point of view?
So first of all, just to explain the premise of the organization, Startup Nation Central was formed about 8.5 years ago, really because even though we have this tech powerhouse reputation, we also have no market here in Israel. So the minute that a startup, leaves the garage, so to speak, or is born, its entire conversation is with overseas markets. And what at Startup Nation Central, we really tackle this on 2 levels. One is we launched a database or a platform called Startup Nation Finder, which is essentially a deep mapping of the whole Israeli tech ecosystem. It's got all of our startups, all the R&D centers, all the VC funds, and even the hubs and the technology coming out of academia. And it's just a great way for corporates and governments and even entrepreneurs in Latin America to kind of peek under the hood in terms of what's going on in the ecosystem here. It's called Startup Nation Finder, and it's online and free. So that's right off the bat. I'm going to call that the wholesale, okay? And then we developed a model, again, based on this premise that Israeli startups need to connect to the world, and they have a pretty strong value proposition in that Startup Nation, we're very good at drilling down on the needs of a local partner. And what we do, we call it an innovation engagement, where we'll work with a corporate from Latin America. We'll understand their pain points and their needs. And then pre-COVID, it was a physical visit. During COVID, it was a digital visit. And now we hope to get back either to physical visits or some kind of combination. But basically, if you take a company like FEMSA Ventures from Mexico, so they actually shared with us some very specific issues relating to logistics and payments. We had our research team go deep into the ecosystem here, come up with a whole menu of potential solutions. And then we connected their C-level, executives to this whole array of opportunities that could solve their pain points. We did the same thing with Roche Mexico. All right, and you could almost imagine, just given the large corporates, and again, the market that exists in Latin America, and what I'm going to call this kind of problem-solving gene that Israeli entrepreneurs have. It's almost like an itch for solving problems beyond our small borders. And at Startup Nation, we're able to sort of take the DNA of that problem-solving gene in the ecosystem and connect it with this deep understanding of the needs of the corporates and bring it together. And that really, for us, has opened up a whole gateway in Latin America. I mean, we look at a country like Colombia in the coffee industry, 40% of Colombian exports. So we hear about issues like pest management, water management, labor management, and we look in our tech world and there's a lot of potential solutions there. Another very specific way is actually the Colombian president is coming here in a couple of weeks. They're opening up an innovation office in Jerusalem. And so that for us is a real wonderful opportunity to open up a conversation there.
No, absolutely wonderful. And by the way, we're users of the Global Finder, and it's a great tool. Just kudos out to the team that put that together. It's a crack team, absolutely great. And we're looking forward to collaborating with you on the Global Finder in the future also. So we're a little bit short on time. So let me go ahead and jump to two entrepreneurs who have gracefully agreed to join us on the panel today. Camilo Navarro from World Chile, and also Alexis Salinas from Proximity in Peru. So maybe if we start with Camilo. You've heard from Wendy, you've heard from Sokchin. Tell us a little bit about your company and the global connection dimension.
Yeah, perfect. Can you guys hear me?
Perfect, Camilo.
Yeah, and I'm going to be sharing my screen very quickly. So yeah, Will the World, thanks for the invite, by the way. Happy to be here and to share a little bit how everything that you were saying actually materialized in what I'm going to just present now. So at Will the World, we're empowering people with disabilities to travel the world without limits. And we came across with this idea with my co-founder and best friend, who, when he was 18 years old, he got involved in a car accident. And as a consequence, we learned, after he became paralyzed and a wheelchair user, we learned very fast that the world is not accessible. And what I mean by that is that nothing is designed for people with disabilities. And for us, that was really frustrating. And we decided to challenge one of the most inaccessible places in the world, which was Patagonia. Long story short, we became the first one in history to achieve Patagonia with a wheelchair user. And it was surprising that when we started planning this trip, we couldn't find any sort of information about where we could stay at, how we could transport, what type of activities we could do in this place. And this is one of the most visited places in Chile and in Latin America. We didn't know if we could even fit in the hotel, if we could use the bathroom, if we could use the bed even, like the altitude of the bed was very important. And we understood that the information wasn't online and there was no service available for us to plan this trip. And as the time passed and we got reached out by a local hotel, and together we decided to build the first online guide to kind of get all this information into one simple website and allow future visitors after we did the first trip to visit Patagonia And that's what we did. We did the trip. It was amazing. Our story went viral. Hundreds of people with disabilities started asking us, hey, guys, can you help me out to do the same trip that you did? And on the other hand, we start receiving requests from other hotels and tour operators who thought that we were some sort of aggregator of information. And that's when we understood that there's a much bigger problem here. The main problem is not happening only in Patagonia, it's happening in every single place in the world, in every single hotel, in every single tour and activity where people with disabilities cannot find accessible information. The accessibility information is not online. And also, people with disabilities that have different needs according to those specific accessibility needs. So then, finally, like businesses, they don't understand what is accessible and what is not. As a consequence, people with disabilities are having terrible experiences when traveling or even deciding not to travel. And when you think that 15% of the world population have disabilities and 15 more are their families and friends, there's 1/3 of the world population who is missing out. 1/3 of the world population who are a larger market, an emerging market larger than China. People with disabilities are spending $120 billion a year, and that only represents 6% of the travel expenditure. That could be even 300 billion. So that's when we decided to start Will the World with the purpose to make the world accessible. And we built an online marketplace where people with disabilities can find and book accessible places to stay, things to do, and multi-day trip with detailed information, smart recommendations for each user needs, and an experienced customer service. We have made more than 1,500 people to book trips through our platform, and we are very proud about this. And this is only possible because of technology. Technology that we develop an accessibility mapping system, a software that is allowing us to get accessible data from our partners, build an online certification and assessment for each one of those partners, and list every one of those services into our platform so our users can book it directly. And on our user sites, our users are developing an online profile where they can state what are their specific needs, and our system can match within those needs what is the best listing that fit that specific need so they can have a reliable and an amazing experience. And we came across, while building this with Born to Global and IDB Lab, about this program and this transfer of technology, deep technology. And we learned an amazing startup in Korea named Dot. Dot is developing this amazing smart braille watch that is allowing people with visual disabilities to read. You know, the importance of them to be able to read. And this smartwatch is allowing to do that. And they even expand further, developing an image recognition system that can detect objects and describe what is around them. And then we thought, like, if we really want to make the world accessible, we need to make it for everyone and every time better. So we thought, like, why don't we use Dot technology to match those objects that we are detecting into a travel experience? And we thought, like, let's start by Chile with the idea to keep expanding these to other destinations in Latin America. For every single person with visual disability, when they travel to Latin America, have the best experience possible, thanks to technology of Dot and Will the World together. And this is very important to do because it's completely aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically reducing inequalities and building more sustainable cities and community. That at the end, it comes to this, like, these are the result of what we're doing together, allowing people with disabilities to explore places that they never thought possible, that we really want to show the world that it's so important to do this, not only because it's a great way to impact society in a very positive way, while building a great business, it's also a moral duty. Every one of you who is listening to me now, I can assure you that you will have a disability as a consequence of aging. There's no way around it. Accessibility needs will impact our life at some point. So if we want to keep traveling, we better start doing something now. And that's Will the World and Dot.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. By the way, what a great pitch, Camilo. Loved it, and so inspirational for me. This is super close to our heart at IDB Lab, and what we do in disabilities in particular is an area of a lot of work. So let me go to Alexis, and then I'm going to ask Sochin and Wendy to chime in a little bit on what they've seen from the two pitches. So Alexis, why don't you tell us a little bit about proximity, what you guys are doing, and kind of this global connection that you have also.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation. We're very happy to be here. Please confirm me that the screen is sharing so I can present.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello everybody. My name is Alexis Salinas, co-founder of Proximity, where we are building the future of training using virtual reality. In many high-risk industries such as mining, energy, construction, manufacturing, traditional training relies on two main methods: classroom training and field training. Classroom training, while easy to implement and inexpensive, lacks in motivation and knowledge retention. On the other hand, field training, while engaging and dynamic, is costly, time-consuming, and even risky for workers. Therefore, it is in effect inefficient. The pandemic has accentuated the drawbacks of both types of training methods. Field training has been suspended due to safety and health restrictions, and it also has revealed the urgency to implement effective and efficient virtual training in companies. We're building the end-to-end immersive training platform for workforce development. What do I mean by immersive training, and why do we believe in this type of training? Because it has far greater effectiveness and efficiency compared to traditional training methods. In other words, it is better training at lower costs. We're achieving 4x faster training time, 0 risk for workers and assets while using virtual assets, 10x more knowledge retention, more confidence on the workers. And thanks to IDB Lab and Born to Global Center, we have partnered with Vernict, an augmented reality and remote solutions company, to address pressing problems in the region related to COVID-19 and the workforce. We have seen many problems in the region. First of all, traditional training is outdated, it is ineffective and inefficient. This doesn't help at all to bridge the skills gap present in the region. Also, maintenance in remote locations is a very complex operation. Remote locations, I mean mining operations in far distant lands, and technicians have to travel really long distances in order to solve these problems, and this halts operations and doesn't help the reactivation of the economy. Also, Peru is one of the most affected countries with the region's second most deaths per million. This has impacted in travel restrictions, quarantines, and this has impacted the main industries in our country and the region. So also training and maintenance operations are in critical conditions, and this isn't helping to reactivate the economy, the workforce, and the companies. So with Vernict, we're leveraging two incredibly powerful technologies, virtual reality and augmented reality, for an integrated XR approach to address problems intensified by COVID-19 in training and maintenance operations in high-risk jobs. Our value proposition eliminates the need for workers to move to other locations for training and maintenance. This is improving workers' safety, efficiency, and skill level, while also helping companies reduce costs. We're very happy to collaborate with Vernict. We have very high expectations of our joint projects. We want to provide the best training, maintenance, and remote collaboration tool for safer, more efficient, and effective work environments, and also job opportunities for low-wage workers in our region. This will help improve and optimize customer operations where our solution is deployed through, and we will track it through key metrics. And also want to be a benchmark of deep tech use and intercontinental partnership in the region. This will accelerate the tech adoption and the development of new startups in our region. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Alexis. We just did a study on priorities for Latin American innovation ecosystems, and the issue of training and skills formation was number one. So and by a big difference. So with others, kind of connectivity, infrastructure, et cetera, which is super important. But this is so needed. This is just absolutely key to our future. So let me shoot this back to Sochin. Impact. This is what we're talking about: change, impact, improving lives, and this is part of the story of what Born to Global is doing with us in Latin America. So Sochin, go ahead.
Yes, I think these two amazing startups have shown us that, as the name of this panel session is, that it's possible to crear puentes between startups. And inspired by the IDB Lab, by these entrepreneurs, by our ecosystem partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have now started a full-fledged project funded by the Korean government to support more joint venture partnerships between startups in deep tech or other impact areas. And we hope that this bridges between startups, as Alexis mentioned, intercontinental bridges, will continue to prosper.
Wonderful. Wendy, kind of what's you saw the two pitches. I'm sure they're not the first two pitches you've seen in your lifetime, but these two are tremendous. I mean, this is really great. Talk a little bit about kind of the Israeli perspective and how we can get more Alexis, more Camilos, and collect them, connect them globally.
Well, first of all, I just have to admit one thing, Yuri, and my countrymen and women are talented in many ways. Presentation skills is not one of them. I hope I'm not stepping out of line, but it's just so refreshing to hear a really strong, well-built pitch. So both Alexis and Camilo, I appreciated that a lot. I want to just a quick comment before I answer your question, because I do want to relate to those pitches. Alexis, I think that what's super important about what your venture is setting out to do is that this whole industry 4.0 sector is huge and burgeoning and made only more profound by COVID. Obviously, even though you're attacking a much deeper problem in the training space, it's really everything related to supply chain and how companies operate and get their field personnel and their in factory personnel trained is a critical topic. So hats off to you. And Camilo, I think that the whole what we call accessibility tech really is what your startup is geared toward is a seriously growing sector here. And I would actually be happy to connect you with a couple of people that are that are very involved there. And I think what you're seeing more and more are institutions that are making disability access for disabled something designed across the board, from the get-go, rather than just a ramp or whatever. But Yuri, to your question, specifically in terms of IDB Lab and ways to connect it to the ecosystem and so on, we're very excited to be part of a pilot that we're doing with Startup Mexico, which is actually being launched next week. So it's an invitation for Israeli startups that want to apply to this pilot, basically to take the very specific needs of Latin American corporates. I believe in this case it's going to be Mexican companies, because it's Startup Mexico, and really have these corporates feed to this small group of Israeli startups that will be selected. What are their pain points in the agri-tech space? And then the Israeli startups will do what they know how to do, just again, in terms of being relentless on the problem solving. But our idea is really to look at this whole AgriPad effort as a pilot, and really to think about ways that we could replicate it in Latin America with Latin American startups as well. So for right now, the specific call to action is for the large companies from Mexico to get involved with AgriPad, and then for the Israeli startups to apply once this thing opens up next week. And I think it's going to be the beginning of something really interesting, with our our grand vision being that all ecosystems do better when they are connected.
Wonderful. I think that's and if we can find the link there, we'll put it in the chat so people know about the opportunity Wendy's talking about. Let me open it up for questions. We're right at our closing time, but I didn't want to close without opening to the audience questions to Wendy's, to Sochin, or Camilo and Alexis. Anything that you want to say or ask, just put it out on the chat, and we'll talk about it in the panel. So let's, whatever is interesting to you. And I have a couple, but I'm going to let the audience, if they're not too timid, write something. So let me jump in with kind of my question, right? And the question is a little bit for Wendy, because we've been working with SNC and with the Israeli ecosystem for a while now, and you know, I guess the question I have is how can we make this discussion not about the transaction between, right, which is great, we need the transactions to happen, but how can we elevate this discussion to make so that people understand that this is really about how we can solve these, like the problems that Camilo is talking about, and Alexis too. How can we elevate that discussion so it's not about like doing a deal, which we need to do, but it's about bringing in these global experiences to actually change the lives of people today in problems that are so needed. How can we push that forward?
So I just want to make sure I understand your question. Do you mean more in terms of how we can get more of a focus on impact tech, or do you mean how do we ramp up the connectivity?
Exactly, the impact dimension of tech, okay. Yeah, which is what we have here on display, right? So that was, you know, I actually hadn't seen the pitches, so I was really excited that both of them are like to have that strong impact dimension.
So look, I think from what I know about the ecosystems in Latin America, I've been following a little bit more on the, you know, Colombian side, obviously, because we're getting ready for this big visit. But that there are so many entrepreneurs in the LATAM ecosystem that are putting their energy and their focus on solving a problem that has to do with solving actually a global challenge. I know in the Israeli ecosystem, there's a big focus on the SDGs, which I think that Camilo referred to when you popped up on the screen, the 2 SDGs that your startup was meeting. So these sustainable development goals, we just actually did a tag about a year ago on Startup Nation Finder, so that any one of the 6,000 startups that is actually, the technology is aimed at meeting an SDG, we tag it. So that means that anyone that's browsing the Finder and, you know, and looking in any particular area is going to get immediate attention onto the ones that are impact focused. But I also just got to bring, you know, So Shin back into the Korean piece back in. I know that right now, as we speak, there are 8 Korean startups that are actually sitting in an accelerator in Jerusalem. Which is a digital health focused accelerator at Hadassah Hospital called BioHouse. And it's fascinating to me that these Korean startups were drawn to come and sit in the Jerusalem tech sector right across the street from Hadassah, this world-class research hospital, but it's all around problems in the digital health space. So I just think, Yuri, by nature of a lot of the sectors that are bubbling up, that you're talking about people that are, you know, getting their hands and feet wet with challenges that matter.
I couldn't agree more, and it kind of not to put a damper on digital marketplaces at all, but because they can have also an impact and have a huge role. But just loving to see all these new verticals which have a direct and clear impact on people's lives. So there's a question here from Adrian for Sukshin. How did you raise awareness from career startups and from LAC partners? And what launched interest on both sides of the ocean? There's also a question about, did you develop a pool of interested startups to begin with? And how do you develop the partnership mindset instead of the selling mindset?
Thank you for the question. I'll try to be very brief, and I'll contact Adrian later for the detailed answers. But basically, I think the most important thing, and the thing I love working with startups, is that they will go wherever there is opportunity. And this time, this opportunity was the possibility to localize their solutions and find a great partner. And I think startups didn't care if it was Latin America or the Caribbean or another continent. The important thing was really the tech matching aspect. It was not really finding a startup that wanted to expand to Latin America and the Caribbean from a sales perspective, but to find the companies that had the synergy, the potential to create synergy by matching their techs. And that's how these 5 great partnerships were born in the past year. And I also want to emphasize that bridges should be bi-directional. So this partnership in the long run, it's not simply, and we were convincing our startups, tell them that it was not a one-directional bridge from Korea to Latin America and the Caribbean, but also that it could cycle back so that their startups should be the partners for the Asian market when these great companies like World or Proximity decide to expand to the Asian market as well. So I think that was an incentive for all players and the ecosystem partners in making this possible. And I'll contact Adrian for the detailed answers. Thank you, Yuri.
Okay, wonderful. So listen, folks, we're coming up to the end of our session. It's been a pleasure and a luxury to have this super high level discussion. Sokjin, Wendy, and Camilo and Alexis, I believe in you. I know everyone here does, and I can bet you everyone in the audience believes in you. Go do what you got to do, and we're always going to be behind you guys. Thank you so much for the panel, and have a wonderful rest of Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Yuri.
Take care, Soshin.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye, thanks.